Okay, so we're actually starting today the 13th chapter, Yud Gimel, chapter 13 of the Nefesh HaChaim of Rav Chaim of Volozhin's classic. Now, just to put us in the picture, what he's done so far is he's talked about the power of human action. That's really the fundamental theme. But he's spoken about how the human is wired in, so to speak, to all the higher dimensions, all the different levels of reality. And now he's talking in the last chapter. He began to talk about why we had to wait for the different levels of the spiritual dimensions, the different levels of what we call soul. But we will explain why that's not quite the right translation. It doesn't quite conceptually come across. But in Hebrew, the words nefesh, ruach, neshama. Why these things had to kind of enter into a crystallized world of the body in order to bodily dimension of space-time, of physical existence, in order to have the impact they're having. And he spoke about the fact that it's actions, for example. In the last chapter we looked at the power of action, and the action actually, he's sort of somewhat sidetracked, but his sidetrack's always on purpose. The point he wanted to get to there was the power of the action creates the reality, and that reality is the thing that we then live in forever. So what we call the world to come is in fact just the world of our choices that we make in the terms of physical actions. But in the next two chapters he's going to extend that to the level of our this chapter we're going to look at, chapter 13, is going to extend to the level of our speech, and then we're going to go to chapter 14 if we'll get there today, but dealing with the level of thought as well. And later on, what he's going to do is he's going to align these with different parts of the soul. So the actions express what we call the nefesh, or the lowest level of the soul, and the ruach, speech, expresses the dimension called the ruach, and the thoughts and ideas and philosophies, morals, all these values, they will express the level called neshama. Later on, we're going to explain all of these things. He works stage by stage, and he kind of paints a picture and paints a picture and paints a picture, and the pieces all fit together. So let's just look at the power today. We're looking at the power of speech. The power that a speech down here generates in the higher inner dimensions. And we've explained this before. What do we mean by inner dimensions? So just a reminder for everybody. All of reality exists on multiple planes simultaneously, right? From the will of God to its outer expression that we're conscious of, our mind would perceive a level of layers. To God, it might all just be a single thought, but to us, there's distinctions between moments in time and moments of space, but also layers of reality. Layers that our consciousness would have to travel through if we were to go all the way back on the journey to the source. And just like in a virtual reality world, you've got the graphics around you and the sounds and everything, but you've also got the program that is really running behind it that's translated into the graphics. And the program itself is a translation of units of information, which are themselves translation of electrical impulses. So reality also occurs on multiple levels. There's millions of these levels in the Kabbalah, but they cluster into four rough levels. We've spoken about it in the past, maybe we'll come to it again. But for now, the point is that therefore the perceptual world that we have is really, just like in physics, the things you see, right, are the way, right, a door in front of us or a camera in front of you, you looking at a bookshelf behind here, you're just watching, we're all watching the impact the mind paints when it receives signals, right, that the electromagnetic radiation, light waves hit the eye, the retina, nerves are sent to the brain has some signals, the mind paints a world out there to map it all. So the mind's pictures are really like a virtual reality world that are mapping signals in the brain, that are mapping signals from the objects, that are mapping the objects themselves, which are just collections of energy in multiple states that according to various laws. So in the spiritual sense, it's pretty much a similar thing. There's many layers to reality. Now, because we're wired into it all, everything we do touches all of them. And so what he's saying here is that speech has a particularly strong power, stronger than action. Now, if you think about that, even on a natural level, that's true for many reasons. Number one is that physically we can only reach literally a few meters or around our body, whereas our speech can go further. But speech also conveys ideas, right? Conveys feelings. It changes, it impacts the mind of another person in a way that an action doesn't do. So But speech, therefore, is much, much holier, much more important, and much more in the inner worlds as well. The subconscious layers of reality has far, far bigger impact. So this through Bechinas Dibur, the aspect of speech, Amar Amos Hanavi. Just by the way, another thing to note is Bechinas Dibur. Technically, sometimes you can do a physical action that is a speech. Like you wave at somebody, that's really a Bechina of Dibur. Bechina means an aspect. So it's really the sense of communication between my brain and your brain and my brain. That's what the Bechina, the aspect of Dibur is. But let's see. Almost the prophet says, Ki hine Yetzira ruach. God who forms mountains and creates the ruach. Right, ruach can be wind, but it can also actually be the spiritual level. But then Magid la'adam maseicha will tell the human over. God will tell the human, presumably when we left this world, what they spoke about. Gamar B'Zayah, and it quotes Asiya, that Shaloshan Hagodah Shaykh al Raza de Milsa, that the concept of Magid la'adam, telling over to the human what they spoke about. The word magid is often related to deeper dimensions of speech. So, for example, when the rabbis speak in the Talmud, and they, instead of giving a halachic discussion, they kind of speak often in riddles or metaphors. It's called agoda, right? Or on Seder night, we have the Haggadah, which is a text with many, many, many layers. And when you're meant to perceive as having many layers, you're revealing often secrets, we use the word Haggadah. And so therefore, the prophet in Amos also used the word Magid la'adam, right? God will reveal to the person their speech. Now, there's no secret. I know what I said, but the secret is he'll reveal just things we didn't realize that we were saying, or the things we didn't realize we were doing when we were speaking, which is touching levels. First of all, just on a simple psychological level, we said something nice to someone, we had no idea what that would do, and no idea how their change of mind would impact others and others and others. But also, in a spiritual level, we're touching the programmatic dimensions of reality, and when we speak, we're actually using the language of the program. And we're therefore touching it and reprogramming it in very deep ways, especially when it's speech in Lashon HaKodesh, in the biblical language, the language of the Torah, the Hebrew language also. Okay, so what he's learning from here, therefore, is the prophet is using that expression to say, God will reveal just how deep your speech actually went, our speech actually went. He's here, Canis Adam. This is a big warning to the human being. We're down in this physical outer layer of the worlds. We don't begin to see what we build with our words, or God forbid what we could destroy with our words. We don't see what's done above in the higher worlds. Every single word that comes out of our mouths. It could go up, it could arise in our minds to say, right? What is a word? I mean, come on, a word is a word. I say a little joke, I say something. What's the big? But you think you could touch something in the higher worlds? We should know faithfully every word the prophet's saying, and every single, the lightest sicha means like usually is like meaningless chatter, right? Not very impactful. Dibur is usually very meaningful conversation, and sicha is usually meaningless. It doesn't matter what we think it is. Everything that comes over our lips, Lois Abid, is never lost and doesn't go for meaninglessness. Now, you listen to this double expression. He's very, very careful with his words. It's not lost, and it didn't go for worthlessness. Meaning, not lost means it's there, and didn't go to emptiness means it impacted. Every single thing we'll ever say impacted. Now think about that. If we would know before we speak, so on the one hand it's quite a frightening thought, but on the other hand it's a powerful thought. The real way to learn Nefesh HaChaim always is, yes, we should be a little bit of awe of the things that we do. We shouldn't try to just like all fuddy-duddy, like nowadays we're like all the rabbis, oh yeah, don't worry about doing things wrong. No, things we do wrong, hurtful comments, even wasteful comments are not ideal. We have a very short life here, and speech is one of the most powerful tools, if not the most powerful tool we have. Let's really, really try to use it for the good. Now this can be like, oh my goodness, I can't live on this level. Okay, let's work on, can we do more things in the day that use speech for the good? Can we take longer in our davening, in our praying? Can we talk to Hashem when we're alone in a room? Can we try and have two nice things that we're going to say to someone today, more than we thought that we wouldn't normally have done, right? 2 things we're going to speak to God and say to God, two things we're going to say to others, and maybe one little bit of Torah learning, right? Even if it's a small idea. Well, if you're watching this, you're already doing Torah learning. But you see what I'm saying? So small things, but the more we do just a little bit, the more we realize we can actually do more and do more. 20 minutes a day, we don't speak Lashon Hara, speak negatively about anybody, right? Can we expand that to 40 minutes a day? These are all things we can do to improve our speech. And the most powerful thing is, the more we improve our speech, the more it improves our relationship with people, obviously, but also our inner world. It's endless. But what he's saying is that itself is a reflection of vast, more powerful things going on with the speech. If you say that in the footnote, if you say that going through the four spiritual dimensions, the four worlds or four world clusters, Abiyah stands for Atzilut, right? The realm where there's only the emanation of God, where if our consciousness could even exist there, we would just feel that we're completely in God's presence, and it would take an immensely powerful awareness not to be extinguished by it. In fact, we would be extinguished by that sense. But if something could exist with any sense of self in there, it would discern the different patterns of God's interaction with the world, the different names that we're going to give to God as He manifests. That's what exists there. It's not God Himself, but you wouldn't know the difference, right? We wouldn't know the difference with that. Beriah is the world where there's a beginning of a sensation of the something other than God, but it's in a very, very rudimentary form. But we're beginning to get the possibilities of all things that can be created. Yetzira is when things begin to form out of other things, and Asiya is our world where it's possible to have enough of a sense of self to have free will, enough of a sense to do actions, to really make our own autonomous choices and so on. So based on the structure of the worlds, we would have expected the pasuk, we would have expected the verse to say that God is, going back to the verse from Amos, the pasuk from Amos, God formed mountains. That seems to be the third world down from the top, and He created the wind. You'd have expected us to always talk about Beriah first, because in the order of creation, for example, in the creation chapter, it says Bereshis bara Elokim. God created something from nothing, and later it used the words Yetzira, God formed. So why in this do we reverse the verbs and use the verb for formation before we've used the verb for creating something from nothing? That's the question. Because you're getting it wrong, he says. We're dealing, as we said, Yetzira is to create something out of something. Veloshin Beriah, whereas Beriah is that's something from nothing. Like all the grammarians and others, this is not just, yes, it's true, it's also in Kabbalah, but you don't need Kabbalah for this insight. So the point is, what it's trying to say is this: even though it seems to us, once creations happened, God only forms mountains. Mountains aren't created something from nothing. Neither are planets, neither are stars. Everything inside this world that we experience are creations something from nothing. Transformative states. The Ramban Nachmanides, in his introduction to the Torah, even goes so far as to say the entire universe, there was only one creation of something from nothing, a tiny little dot, smaller than a seed of mustard, right? Everything's come out of that. Everything's formed something from something from something from something. That dot expands, presumably, and then somehow forms different things, and that's the world that we have. So everything in this world is something from something that we experience. Okay. So now what he says, however, is this. The only creations of things from nothing were during the 6 days of creation, which is obviously therefore a higher dimension than our world. The 6 days of creation are not inside our space-time. You can't go back in a time machine and find them. They are, if you like, the programmatic world generating our existence in all of our space-time, which we now operate within. The truth is, as it was then, to some degree, so it is now. It's true you needed those are the days where things are being created out of nothing. And it's true that within our world, everything we see and experience is something from something, but there's also a sense in which everything we see is something from nothing. Because, every single moment of reality, there is a creation, something from nothing. On the one hand, the universe is entirely law-like, and every object we look at, we can describe the cause and effect process of how it got here. And on the other hand, the entire universe and the entirety of space-time is being thought into existence by God. If he would at any moment, I'm using the metaphor of thought, right? If at any moment he would stop thinking about us, we'd just stop existing. So on the one hand, everything we see is something from something. This camera, me, you, any screen you're watching this on, any object behind me, in front of everything we can talk about when it began, what it's caused, everything's created something from something. And at the same time, all of that process and all of that is always being, so to speak, from our perspective in time, we'd use the word always, but it's an act of thought or an act of creation of God, something from nothing. And the Hebrew word for that emanation of God's thought is the ruach, or the spirit of the thing. Right. So that's why the pasuk first talks about Yetzira. It's talking from our perception outwards. Yes, if we talk from the inner world of God, we'd use the verb Beriah, something from nothing. Then we'd use the word Yetzira, something from something. But when we talk about our perception of reality looking backwards, we talk about first, we see that this is all formation. Everything we look at is something from something. And we recognize that God is behind that, meaning God is acting through the laws of nature, so we say he formed mountains, but the mountains are clearly created something from something. And then we go one stage deeper and we say, actually, if we really think about it, he's constantly creating the breath of life that breathes this entire universe into existence. So that's what the verse said. God, I look at and I see, wow, these mountains, God has used the laws of nature to form them from the material of planet Earth. But then I look using the laws of nature, right? And then I think even more deeply, one sec, he's breathing this entire world into existence. The air, the spirit of so to speak, of God's breath, if you like, is a metaphor, right? The ruach, that spirit of the universe, is God as well. So I'm going deeper. That's what the verse is saying. And then the verse finished with, the highest level is to realize how powerful our speech is. So you can see where he's going with this. He's pointing out that by the way, it's beautiful. He's drawing all of this out of one single verse. In Amos. And he's doing it deliberately because yes, the ideas are from Kabbalah, but he doesn't want us to have to rely on the Kabbalistic world for this. What he's showing is Kabbalah is trying to unlock the inner dimensions of the Torah. But just look at the Torah itself carefully and you can see all of this. You don't need to, yes, I'll quote you as Zohar and others, but ultimately, everything I'm saying, he says, everything we're saying can be heard in the words of the prophets. Okay, that's what he's saying. Now, and that's fine. And now you're thinking very deeply, you'll notice the following. If you think about the four worlds or four layers of reality that we just described, Atzilut, emanation, followed by creation of something from nothing, followed by the world in which you can see things forming out of other things, followed by the world in which you see things, actions. And of course, all of those four to some degree exist in this world. Those four worlds are not in other places, pardon me. It's not other universes in some multiverse. They're just four levels of perceiving this reality. So, they're going, if you like, in the spatial metaphor, we would see everything going from a higher level to a lower level. So you got, let's say, the world of God's pure will, and then it kind of drops a level where it thickens out a little bit. I'm again using analogical, metaphorical language, and then a lower level and a lower level and a lower level until it kind of physicalizes, crystallizes into our outer level. So for all these levels, we kind of cluster them into four stages, some that are qualitatively quite distinct from one another, apart from the higher sparks. Says generally, fine, we're not even giving them a name. I said that quite quickly. It's a bracket. I'm not going to go into that now. For Ulam Arishan, the highest level of these four worlds, or another way of talking about them is frameworks within which reality is expressed. So the highest one, the one that we can talk about closest to God's will, or perhaps even, you could almost use the word God's will. The first that God was emanated, we call it the world of emanation. Anything that we can give a name to, which means even abstractly have some kind of metaphorical picture for, is called Atzilut, emanation. Atzilut pishnayim loy, right? That in other words, what it means is the word Atzilus has the Hebrew word has two meanings. Lashon chibur, it on the one hand is an expression of connection. Like the word etzloi, to be etzel somebody, alaf tzadi lamed, means to be next to them, right? In communication and in contact. Lashon is spashtus ruchani, but it also means emanation. So that we use the word emanation in English, but the word Atzilus literally both means emanation, to emanate, right? To spring forth or to express, I guess might be what say, but it also means to be incredibly close and connected. Now, where do we see it mean emanation? In Bamidbar V'yatzam min haruach, Moshe Rabbeinu emanates from his own spiritual level outwards, so that's called that word Atzile Yodov. We're using Yechezkel. Shem mechubarim baguf tomid v'gam haschalas ispashtos Yodov. Fine. Ki olam Atzilus hu hakol elokus gomor. Now, very important. Here's, I'll tell you what it didn't say, because people sometimes get this one wrong. It didn't say the world of Atzilus is Elohim Gomor, is completely God. Because we're going to talk about partitions of it, or different things within it. You can't say there's differences within God. It's Elokus Gomor, godliness. Meaning if you are in that state of consciousness, you literally cannot perceive anything other than, this is clearly God, right? It's even if it's not God's essence, you'll be in total sense of nothing but God here. Which is godliness. To some degree, we can manifest godliness when we do positive actions in the world, and right, and we behave like ambassadors for God. But that's a very, very low level. Up there, it's completely godliness, elokus, right? Total godliness. You wouldn't say there's anything you would see as other than godliness. Okay. So now what we're really doing there for us is amazing. In this little sidetrack, we're actually describing these four worlds. Okay, so the innermost dimension that we can relate to or speak. Obviously, when we talk about the will of God, we're going so close to his essence that we at some point lose the ability to have any words about it whatsoever, or even abstractly think about or make any sense whatsoever what we're talking about. Because our experience is within space and time, 3 dimensions of space and time. Our ability to think abstractly goes further. We can think about maths. We could do the maths of 4-dimensional space, or 75-dimensional space, or 755-dimensional space. We could do a lot of things, but even that's got very severe limits. The axioms of mathematics, that we can't really go beyond the axioms of logic and maths and so on. That's as far as our brain can go. Now, since there's a creator of all of that, and the creator is not bound by any of that, there's going to be a point backwards where our most abstract thinking, clearly there's going to be points where our abstract thinking will paint the wrong picture. As soon as we're talking about God, we are always painting the wrong picture. Right? If you try, so you have to use the words but not put any picture to it, and that's very hard because our brain instinctively does this. I'll just give a few examples. Right? So someone will say, "Does God love us?" And we think, "Oh, like my emotions pull on me." No. Oh, so God doesn't love us, right? People read the Rambam, he says you can't use adjectives to describe God. So God doesn't have wisdom, doesn't have love, doesn't have awareness, doesn't have... No, that's even worse, because now what we think of is a human being who doesn't love. We think of a psychopath or a cold, or lacking wisdom. You can't use... Yeah, you can use the positive words as long as we mean the patterns of behavior that God chooses to interact with. But then we think, if I was a human and was just cold and just switched on program love, program this, that would be quite... again, using the word psychopathic, that will be very empathy free. And so you see, we just keep, our problem is we keep thinking of a human meeting all these descriptions, and we do this in so many ways. And that's why at a certain point we gotta stop trying to make the pictures, just realize we can use the word in terms of the effect. When we say God loves us, we mean it is legitimate to say we are loved, and the source of that love is God. The mechanism we will never exactly be able to relate to, because we'll always relate to the human experience of loving, not loving, and so on. So we can talk, in the Kabbalistic world, we talk about the midas. God creates these attributes, right, and then operates them. See, if I've got a program, I didn't create it. If God created love, right, then in a certain sense, he loves us more than anything in the world can love, because his love is a complete choice. But it's not a love like we do, where there's an emotion pulling us, and maybe it takes the good place, and maybe it takes the bad place, and we lose control. That's not what's going on. So we got to just understand that any picture we paint is going to be wrong, but we can use the words intelligibly as long as we're careful. Now, when we get all the way to the dimension of Atzilus, right, then that's the furthest our brain can even intelligibly use words. It's incredibly deep. It's essentially the names, plural, of God, which are all subsumed within one name, the 4-letter name. But that name it's 4 letters, and it has different dimensions and aspects. And here, on the one hand, the will of God is basically completely unified, and on the other hand, we begin to see the different patterns that God will use to interact with the world, and those are the different names, as I explained earlier. So Atzilus on the one hand means everything's close together, everything is at one, and on the other hand, it's an emanation, which implies there's other. So that's what's going on. Elokus God, it's all complete godliness. And then he quotes examples like in the Kabbalah and the Tikkun about Atzilus, Iyu v'garmai uchad, right? Okay, God in his expression, or God in the is all one, right? And the different things then he quotes. He has a whole bunch of Kabbalistic quotes over here, sources that he's quoting that we can look at, and again, whether you talk God in his clothing is one, his expression is one, God in his whichever, it's all one. At that level, we wouldn't see them as separate things. V'nikra ayin, the name of God that we use in that world, or the name we've used in that world, is nothing. Now, in English, when you say nothing, you mean complete negation, right? Total negation. And that's true because the English word thing is that which can be defined. So a door is a thing, and a machine is a thing, and an idea is a thing, and a number is a thing. These are all entities that can be defined. You can put their parameters. But the creator of all space, time, and definition, who is outside of space, time, and definition, is not a thing. But if your language is limited to things, you get stuck. You can talk about something, but that's all you can talk about. If it's not a thing, you say it's nothing, right? You can't talk about a thing that's not a thing, right? Everything is a thing. Just listen to the words I just said. You can't talk about thing as a thing. Everything is a thing, right? Everything, something, nothing. But if you're trying to talk about the source of all things, you're going to be talking about that which is not a thing. And that's not the same as what we mean in English by nothing, but it's closer to nothing than it is to any actual thing. It's like that which lacks any spatial expression, any expression in time, any dimension. The source of all space and time is not a part of space and time. So when we say God is infinitely old, we don't mean God is very, 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 very old. I mean God's not in time. Don't mean God is all-knowing, means he's has loads and loads and loads of knowledge. No. He's completely outside of knowledge. His knowledge is that he creates the world, and therefore he knows in a deeper way than the world can ever know itself. So that's what's going on. So God is not a thing. The source of reality is not a thing. There's a beautiful famous line by Rav Kook, because Rav Kook was drawing on this principle that occurs in a lot of Jewish thought, that there's nothing 100% false in the world. Even the worst falses always have to have some truth, that they either just take a piece of truth and distort it. Right? So you might talk, equality is a beautiful value. True, right? Distort it out of all proportion and make it their only value, and it can trample all the other values. Then you get the horrors of some of the worst communist dictators who, in the name of this beautiful value, are willing to mass murder people. So even ugly ideologies often come from a point that is true, and even by itself, in its right proportion, beautiful. So somebody asked Rav Kook, in that case, where's atheism? Right? What possible truth could there be at the core of atheism? And he talks about how people get misled in their beliefs in God into deifying things that shouldn't be deified. Either they humanize God, where a little bit of commentary on what Rav Kook says here, or as he says, you can get lost and the words themselves become God. And it's instinctive to deify humans and humanize God, and that's very dangerous, because then we take all our negative defects and project them into the divine, and we end up just making God us and us God, and etc. So the atheist comes along and sweeps away all projection of thinghood that can be God. And in a certain sense, when you think about it that way, one might say that atheism has the closest picture of God than anything other than pure monotheism, pure Judaism, pure oneness itself, right? It's the step away, but it's the right step. It's an important step on the way. It's the denial of anything being God. And that's right. If they just go one step further, now the word ayin, aleph, yud, nun, that's where we then find Hashem. So that's the world of Atzilus. Ayin. That no mind can possibly grasp anything in there. God, his, so to speak, life is, so anything you could say about it is all one in that place. Will, everything, it's all one. Okay, Olam Sheni, the second stage of reality. Remember, there's many, many levels, and this is us looking back. This is, from God's perspective, everything's probably all one, just we can't begin to imagine God's perspective. But Olam Sheni, the second stage, if you like, There's things within each of these levels. It now drops in level, in the direction of eventually forming a world like ours. There's something, you could use the word yesh, there's thing here. The world of Beriah, this next level, you can look at everything that was in Atzilut, but now it seems to be like the root of the tree is branching out now to the point where you could say there's now something. We can use words, and within something is a very lot, right? That one thing, whatever something is, has the potential now. We can start to begin to see potential. And that's what we call yesh ma'ayin, things like Beriah. That's why we call it creation from nothing, like I've written about. The third level, the third world, so if we're going backwards, well, we'll come back to backwards soon. But now we drop a level over, and it's Abba Yosa. Things begin to thicken out-ish. And Musag Yosa, there's a lot more grass. Now in this world, we can see many, many concepts that could become manifest in this world. And we call it yesh mesh, something from something, and concepts are emerging out of concepts. You might have the entire mathematical structures and universal and all sorts of things that could be potential states and so on. We call it Yetzira k'ma yesh meyesh, right? Just like in the physical world, we use the word Yetzira when you take clay and turn it into a vessel, things coming out of other things. We're now beginning to see what all this pure thingness that exists of entities in the world of Beriah now begin to take real shape and form. And Olam Adalad is Gemar Melachas. The fourth level is the finishing of all of this, and that came Shekadmur, that came before it. And everything is now really fixed according to the original intention that God had, that there should be conscious entities to receive His goodness. Right, the original intention that God had right at the beginning of all of this. This is the lowest level, where you can actually have the human being, upon whom God will then pump all the light or the energies into the world in a reflexive interaction between God's will and us. So everything we're doing, the world will be responsive of. But it was all to be able to generate something where all this potential becomes manifest, and the potential for separate identity and awareness becomes crystallized and becomes real. So if you were journeying backwards, by the way, and you were to look at everything in this world and go into its program level, we would now be in the world of Yetzira, where everything is mathematics and programming and not got a physical form. And then if we go higher than that, we would get into a world where it's kind of all dissolving in such a deep unity that it all feels like there's kind of an expression of a single root, right? And then if we go one higher level, we get into the pure will of God. So these are just looking at anything back in it. So if we look at any object and could see beneath the surface, we would see what it expresses. That would be like looking at its Yetzira, third level world form. Then we would see how it fits into the single plan of creation that's in the world of Beriah, the oneness, like going back to that point that it all comes from. And then Atzilut, we would just be in the will of God, right? Which is ultimately behind it all. So that's any object we look at has all these dimensions to it. Okay, so in this fourth lower world, that's what, which is the only place where God's goodness can actually manifest and touch another entity that can respond to it and feel separate from God and feel an independent sense of self. All of this, like it says, "Vayar Elokim es kol asher asa v'hinei tov moed." Right in the end of the creation, the 6 days of creation, God saw all that He'd done, and behold, it was very good. Amr Bereshis Rabbah, the ancient Medrash says, "Hinei tov moed," tov, good, right? That's creation's good. Ma'od is the letters Adam. Ma'od, it's very good. What makes it very good is that we now have the human. We now have consciousness. The universe has come alive. It can perceive itself. There's something with the sense of self other than the Creator, God Himself, and that's now the state of very good. The Chenusham Bashat actually quotes different sources. Amr Shimon ben Elazar mitchilas briyasa shel ha'olam it's avakadosh baruch hu la'ases shutafos tachtonim. God wanted from the beginning, once He's created this will, this vision, the will of God was there should be a partner. Do you understand how powerful it is? We are partners with God. All of this levels of reality are around these little tiny Homo sapiens, and yet we are what all of this is for. This conscious awareness that can bring God in. This world is called the world of action. Why? Usually in the Torah, when somebody does action, it means they complete something. right? They prepare a meal. They've got all the raw ingredients, and now they turn it into the thing it needs to be. Yes. David Shom, etc. Okay. Now, back into the main text. So we've digressed to see all these worlds. This was the place where he felt he should talk about it, and now we go. What's called Filo Hevel de Puma Sarna is quoting even the breath of the mouth, right? The place, the Duchta Islay, right? So that it's got so yeah. So sorry, I've got the place. Duchta is it's got a place, right? Asar is a place. A duchta is like a position or a standing or something like that. The kudsha bricho avid minei mad avid, and God does with it whatever He wants to do. Vafilu mila devar nash, even the words of the human being, right? Every time we open our mouth, this is going back now to the power of speech, and every time we use words, and even the air that's coming out of us, all of this. I feel just the voice, it's never impactless. You're singing, you're humming, something's happening. Each one has a place, each one has a standing. It's all there, lighting up worlds or not. Even a word. Sorry, that's sorry. In the Sedra Metzora, there's a kol milah v'milas, every single word, the apik b'anash mepumei, that comes out of the mouth of the human, salkal eila, goes above, of a kari, kiin, also again it goes up to the place where it operates, and again, the beginning of Parashat Nosai, who milah the apik, the word, that the apik b'anash mepumei, that human brings out of their mouth, salkal v'kari, kiin, again it goes up to all the way up, and impacts worlds, fine. Whatever comes out of the mouth is done above. And it switches something on. Whether that's good speech, we use our speech for good, we make someone happy, we do a mitzvah, we daven, we learn, beautiful things start happening. Flows of positive energy move into the world. God's revelation seeps into the world. For Asim Beriah Ficha, right, as the pasuk says in Yeshaya, in Isaiah chapter 51:16, God says, I'll place my word in your mouth, Lintoya Shamayim Lisados, in order to plant heaven and found worlds, right? And then again quotes from the Zohar in Parashas Emor, right? Man to apik mila kadishim, anyone who brings a holy word over their mouth, mila do'eraisa, a word of Torah, is avid mine kala, v'solik le'ela. A voice comes up from them, and as it were, goes all the way upwards. This and awakens. We spoke in the last time what these malachim, these messengery algorithms, systems, and consciousnesses are. It awakens all of these. We call them angels in English, but I explained why that's not so good. Just use that word; it conjures up the wrong image. But it awakens all these structures in. So it puts crowns on the head, and there's a tremendous joy in the upper and lower worlds. Again, I'm not going to explain every metaphor here, but we get the picture. And then he quotes other places. I'm not going to go through every single one of them. He really says it's okay. Let's go to the next paragraph. Also, becomes Rams Dikunim. Also, other parts of the Kabbalistic literature, Mikol, Dibur, V'Koil, V'Hevel, Do'Raisa, every voice, word, even the breath being uttered, if it's to understand God's law, God's will, the Torah, or prayer, Nivraim, Kama Malachim Kedoshim, what it does, it powers up the creation of these new, again, let's call them conscious algorithms, these positive vehicles for the flow of God's light, angels, and God forbid not, then we switch these off or produce negative forces, blockage forces, and God forbid for the other side, the goyim chasharon arisu churban ma'alamas, and it can cause, God forbid, damage and destruction in the inner structures, that all the way up to the point in the inner levels that is called the source of speech. Again, he quotes Zayar, he quotes all these things. Okay, again, this is from Parashat Tzav. Dar leslach tavel vish, right? That these no good about there's no good or bad that isn't impacted by us. Essentially, woe is to the creation that sees and doesn't realize what they see. Because there's no speech that doesn't have a place. Right? These are actually a play on a mission in Pirkei Avos. Anyway, but go over Shema Melech Hazakol. The voice of the birds can travel the voice, right? It's like always it says that don't say something that no one can hear because it'll be heard because the bird can carry it. Meaning, voices carry. But here, what it means on a deeper level is there's vehicles that literally impact in inner worlds, things that we don't realize we're doing. Kama Alfe Morid, Gavdin Achidin, etc. Okay, I'm going to go jump a little bit further. He says the bird in the physical world, when the rabbis use that term, actually in the spiritual world, we literally mean things that lift other things. We use the same word for them, and therefore our speech gets lifted to places we would never imagine. Okay, and then he quotes again, if a person speaks badly, it creates the destructive angels. Then in Koheles, we have the passage, next paragraph, right, that literally the verse in chapter 5 of Ecclesiastes of Koheles says, why should God get upset on your voice and undo the work of your hands? And the Gemara in Erechin says, God, you see that the voice, what you say is much more impactful than what we do with our hands. Saying the wrong words can be like serving idolatry even without physically bowing down. Back to the beginning now of the chapter of Amos, right, that we tell a person what his speech is. So I know we're a little bit over what we usually get time, but let's just finish the 3 lines. The time we come to have our judgment before God, and we explained in the last chapter, everything we experience once we left this world is just the choices. We only live once, this life. And this is the only life we ever have. We just have the other side of it forever. We see what our actions really are, and we live in them. And to whatever extent we've caused damage, we might be able to burn through them and then live with the good. But either way, when it comes to the time of judgment, which then God gives us the secret. Magid means he reveals the secret. Raza de Mil, so the secret of every word we said. What our words did in the inner worlds, in the higher worlds. Like we said, the word Haggadah means secret. So this is amazing what we've seen over here. We've not just covered the dimension of speech, but also what the Kabbalists mean by the 4 worlds. And Yetzira, next week we will try to move further into chapter 14, where we now get into what thought is. That's going to be even higher still. Okay, so we'll stop here.